In the sunlit hospice wing of Oakdale Medical Center, a 68-year-old retired literature professor was about to upend everyone's expectations. What began as a routine family visit transformed into something extraordinary when Eleanor Sullivan overheard her children discussing funeral arrangements. Eleanor wasn't your average terminal patient. For 6 months, she had been secretly working with doctors on an experimental treatment that was showing remarkable results. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. When her daughter mentioned casket options, Eleanor had no idea she was about to trigger a revelation that would leave her family speechless. Eleanor's quiet retreat to her private journal would unleash a truth about her condition that would change everything. The Sullivan family would never recover from learning their supposedly dying mother had been getting better all along. The sterile hospital scent of disinfectant mingled with the fragrance of the lilies her son Michael had brought that morning. Eleanor Sullivan sat propped up against the adjustable bed, carefully arranging the greeting cards that lined her bedside table. Each colorful envelope contained messages of sympathy and farewell, heartfelt goodbyes from colleagues, former students, and friends who believed they were sending final words of comfort. At 68, Eleanor still insisted on organizing these cards herself, despite her daughter Rebecca's gentle offers to help. "The flowers really brighten up the room, Mom," Rebecca said, adjusting the curtains to let more afternoon light filter through. Her voice carried that particular strain of forced cheerfulness that Eleanor had come to recognize over the past months, the tone of someone trying desperately to maintain normalcy in the face of impending loss. "They're lovely," Eleanor replied, her smile slight but genuine. She glanced toward the window where the hospital grounds stretched out below, autumn leaves beginning their colorful transformation. Some changes were beautiful, she thought. Others were simply necessary. Michael sat in the corner chair, his attention divided between his mother and the tablet in his hands. At 45, he carried himself with the efficiency of someone who believed organization could somehow control chaos. His daughter Lily, 17 and wearing earbuds, scrolled through her phone with occasional glances at her grandmother, her expression a mixture of discomfort and genuine concern. "Actually," Michael said, setting his tablet on the side table with purposeful movement, "I think we should discuss some practical matters while we're all here." The phrase, "practical matters," hung in the air like an unwelcome visitor. Eleanor's fingers stilled on the card she'd been reading, but she remained silent. She had learned over decades of teaching that silence often revealed more than immediate response. "I've been researching options," Michael continued, his voice taking on the measured cadence he used when presenting business proposals. "The Lakeside Memorial Gardens has a beautiful section near the water. Private, peaceful. They have several service packages that seem appropriate." Rebecca shifted uncomfortably. "Michael, maybe this isn't the best time. When would be a better time?" Michael interrupted, his tone gentle but insistent. "We need to make these decisions while we can. The doctor said 3 months at most. We're already halfway through October." Eleanor watched her children with a strange detachment, as if observing characters in one of the novels she'd taught for 30 years at Westfield University. The irony wasn't lost on her. How many literary deathbeds had she analyzed with her students? How many fictional last moments had she dissected for symbolism and meaning? Now her own approaching death had become the subject of discussion, complete with practical logistics and emotional subtext. "The casket options are actually quite dignified," Michael continued, returning his attention to his tablet. "I've narrowed it down to 3 choices that seemed like something you might appreciate, Mom. All cherry wood, simple lines. Nothing ostentatious. Have you considered what she'll wear?" Lily asked suddenly, removing one earbud. The bluntness of youth sometimes cut through pretense in ways adults couldn't manage. The room fell silent. Eleanor felt something crystallize within her, not anger, though that flickered briefly, but a clear and sudden decision. 6 months of secrecy had become a burden too heavy to bear. "I think," Eleanor said, her voice stronger than it had been in weeks, "that the blue dress from my retirement party would be entirely inappropriate for a funeral." Rebecca looked up sharply. "Of course, Mom. We can find something more suitable." "You misunderstand me," Eleanor continued, carefully placing the card she'd been holding back on the table. "The blue dress would be inappropriate for a funeral. Because I'm planning to wear it to my birthday party next spring." The silence that followed contained multitudes, confusion, hope, disbelief, all suspended in the sterile hospital air. "Mom," Michael began carefully, "I know this is difficult to accept, but the prognosis was very clear. Dr. Mendelsohn explained that the treatments weren't working, that the cancer had spread to the initial treatments," Eleanor interrupted, "weren't effective." "That's correct." She reached for the journal she kept beside her bed, the leather-bound notebook her colleagues had given her upon retirement. However, there have been developments that I haven't shared with any of you. Her children exchanged worried glances. The kind that communicated their shared fear that their mother had entered a denial stage of grief. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel, it means a lot to us. Now back to the story. 6 months ago, Eleanor continued, opening her journal to a page marked with a blue ribbon, I was accepted into an experimental treatment program at Rochester Medical Institute. Dr. Anita Sharma's immunotherapy trial. I've been receiving treatments twice a month since April. Rebecca's hand flew to her mouth. But you've been here, at Oakdale. We've visited you every week. On weekends, Eleanor nodded. The treatments happen on Tuesdays and Wednesdays. Mrs. Peterson from my book club drives me. The hospital administration has been quite accommodating about my comings and goings. Michael stood, his professional composure cracking. Why wouldn't you tell us something like this? We're your family. We've been preparing for, he stopped, unable to finish the sentence. For my death, Eleanor completed the thought. Yes, I can see that. Quite thoroughly, in fact. She gestured toward Michael's tablet where funeral options were still displayed. On the screen. I didn't tell you because I couldn't bear to give you false hope, Eleanor explained, her professor's voice emerging, the one that had guided thousands of students through complex literary analysis. The trial has only a 27% success rate. I didn't want you to go through losing me twice if it failed. And has it? Lily asked, both earbuds removed now, her young face intent on her grandmother's. Failed? Eleanor allowed herself a small smile. My last 3 scans have shown a 40% reduction in tumor size. Dr. Sharma believes I'm responding exceptionally well to the treatment protocol. The journal in her hands contained 6 months of careful documentation, treatment dates, side effects, blood test results, scan reports, all recorded in her precise handwriting alongside quotes from the poetry and literature that had sustained her through the worst days. Emily Dickinson's words were underlined on multiple pages. Hope is the thing with feathers that perches in the soul. That's wonderful news, Rebecca said, tears forming. But why keep it secret for so long? Why let us believe you were dying when there was hope? Eleanor closed the journal carefully. Because hope is a fragile thing, easily crushed. Because I needed to focus entirely on getting better without managing everyone else's emotions about my getting better. And because, quite frankly, I needed to understand who I would be if I survived this. Michael sat back down heavily. I don't understand. Terminal illness changes you, Eleanor explained. People treat you differently. They speak to you differently. They make allowances. For 6 months, I've been the dying mother, the fading professor, the patient with an expiration date. I needed to know who Eleanor Sullivan might be if she had a future again. The room fell silent once more, as her children absorbed this information. Outside the window, a group of birds took flight from a nearby tree, their synchronized movement a brief, beautiful interruption against the autumn sky. So you're not dying? Lily asked, with the direct simplicity that Eleanor had always appreciated about her granddaughter. We're all dying, technically speaking, Eleanor replied with the ghost of her classroom smile. But it appears I'm doing so at a much slower rate than previously anticipated. Mom, this isn't funny, Michael said, though relief was beginning to replace the shock in his expression. We've been grieving, making plans, preparing ourselves emotionally. Planning my funeral, Eleanor added, her tone sharpening slightly. Selecting my casket. Deciding where I'll be buried. All without consulting me, I might add. Rebecca had the grace to look embarrassed. We thought we were sparing you the painful details. Ah yes, Eleanor nodded, protecting the delicate dying woman from the reality of her own mortality. How considerate. The sarcasm felt good, a return to her true self after months of careful gentleness from everyone around her. What happens now? Michael asked, ever the practical one. Eleanor reached for the small silver bell beside her bed, the one the nurses had provided for her to signal when she needed assistance. Its clear tone rang through the room. Now, she said, I believe it's time for a different kind of planning altogether. Within moments, Nurse Jenkins appeared at the door, a tall woman with close-cropped gray hair and the efficient movements of someone who had been in healthcare for decades. Is everything all right, Professor Sullivan? She asked, though the smile they exchanged suggested she already knew the answer. Quite all right, Martha, Eleanor replied. I believe it's time for the other folder. Nurse Jenkins nodded and disappeared briefly, returning with a thick manila envelope that she handed to Eleanor. Thank you, Eleanor said. And perhaps you could bring us some tea? This might take a while. As the nurse left, Eleanor opened the envelope and removed several documents, spreading them across the adjustable table that extended over her bed. What is all this? Rebecca asked, moving closer to see. This, Eleanor said, is my party planning portfolio. If you're going to spend your energy planning an event centered around me, I'd prefer it be a celebration of life rather than a memorial of death. The papers before them revealed something none of them had expected: detailed notes for what appeared to be an elaborate celebration. Venue options, catering menus, music selections, even a guest list that ran several pages long. I don't understand, Michael said again, though the documents in front of him were clear enough. You've been planning a party while we've been planning a funeral? Precisely, Eleanor confirmed. Though I prefer to think of it as a Renaissance gala. A celebration of second chances and new beginnings. Lily picked up one of the papers, a mock-up of an invitation with elegant script across the top that read, Eleanor Sullivan's Renaissance, because some stories deserve a better ending. This is kind of badass, Grandma, Lily said with newfound admiration. Eleanor laughed, a genuine sound that none of them had heard in months. Thank you, Lily. That was rather the intention. As her family began to examine the documents with increasing interest, Eleanor felt something she hadn't allowed herself to feel in a very long time, not just hope, but a certain satisfaction. The kind that came from reclaiming your own narrative when others had presumed to write your ending for you. The Westfield University Grand Hall is available for the spring equinox, she explained, pointing to the venue information. I've always found that date symbolically appropriate for new beginnings. Professor Abernathy from the music department has offered his jazz quartet for the evening. And the catering options are from Claudia's. Remember how much everyone enjoyed their food at my retirement party? Mom, Rebecca said slowly, how long have you been planning this? Eleanor considered the question. I made the first inquiries about 3 months ago, when the second round of scans showed improvement. Dr. Sharma cautioned me against excessive optimism, but I decided that planning a party was far better therapy than accepting a funeral. Michael was scrolling through the guest list, his expression shifting from confusion to something approaching awe. There must be 200 names here. Former students, colleagues, friends from 3 different states. 217, Eleanor corrected. I've been quite thorough. A literature professor understands the importance of a complete cast of characters. For the first time since entering the room, Michael smiled, a genuine expression that reached his eyes. You never intended to die quietly, did you? I never intended to die at all, if I could help it, Eleanor replied simply. At least, not on anyone else's schedule. Nurse Jenkins returned with a tray of tea and cookies, setting it carefully on the side table. She exchanged another knowing look with Eleanor before leaving them to their conversation. How many people know about this? Rebecca asked, gesturing to both the treatment journal and the party plans. About any of this? Dr. Sharma and her team, of course. Martha and 2 other nurses here. Mrs. Peterson from book club who drives me to treatments. Professor Abernathy, who's been helping with the music arrangements. Eleanor poured tea into the cups with steady hands. I haven't been entirely alone in this journey. But you didn't tell us, Michael said, and the hurt in his voice was evident. Your own children. Eleanor passed him a cup of tea, her expression softening. Michael, when you and Karen divorced 5 years ago, you didn't tell anyone how badly you were struggling for nearly 6 months. You presented a composed face to the world while you sorted through your feelings. Michael looked startled. How did you? I'm your mother, Eleanor said simply. I knew you were in pain even when you thought you were hiding it perfectly. I respected your need to process that pain privately before sharing it. She turned to Rebecca. And you, my dear, didn't tell anyone about applying to graduate school last year until you'd already been accepted. You needed to make that decision for yourself before opening it up to family opinions. Rebecca's surprise was evident. I didn't think you knew about that either. Again, Eleanor smiled. I'm your mother. I notice things. She took a sip of her tea before continuing. We all need private spaces to determine who we are in the face of significant change. My potential recovery was no different. The room felt different now, the sterile hospital atmosphere replaced by something warmer, more honest. The cards and flowers that had seemed like harbingers of endings now appeared simply decorative, stripped of their mournful significance. So, Lily said, examining the party plans with interest, no funeral then? Not in the immediate future. If I have anything to say about it, Eleanor replied. Though I'm sure Michael has compiled some lovely options for whenever that day eventually arrives. Michael had the grace to look sheepish as he closed the tablet that still displayed casket selections. Instead, Eleanor continued, I thought we might redirect all that organizational energy towards something more celebratory. The Renaissance Gala needs committees, after all. Someone to handle invitations, someone to finalize the venue details, someone to coordinate with the caterers. Rebecca laughed, the sound slightly watery with unshed tears. You're turning your near-death experience into a party planning opportunity? I'm turning it into a life-affirming celebration, Eleanor corrected. And an opportunity for this family to come together around something joyful rather than mournful. The contrast wasn't lost on any of them, the funeral plans made without her input versus the celebration she had designed herself. One represented an ending determined by others, the other, a continuation she had claimed for herself. I have one condition, Eleanor added, her tone becoming serious once more. No more protection. No more decisions made about me without including me. No more gentle handling of the fragile dying woman. If I'm going to continue living, and it appears that I am, then I intend to do so fully and on my own terms. Michael and Rebecca exchanged glances, a wordless sibling communication that Eleanor recognized from their childhood. That seems fair, Michael finally said. Though you have to promise to be equally transparent with us. No more secret medical treatments or clandestine party planning. Agreed, Eleanor nodded. Transparency in all directions. As the afternoon light began to fade outside the hospital window, the Sullivan family found themselves in a place none of them had expected. When the day began, gathered not around impending loss, but around tentative possibility. The funeral plans had been replaced by party preparations, the grief suspended in favor of cautious hope. Eleanor watched her children begin to engage with her Renaissance plans, offering suggestions and asking questions. This, she thought, was what she had been missing in the months of treatment and secrecy, the simple pleasure of planning for a future together, of seeing beyond the immediate horizon of illness. When visiting hours ended, her family departed with promises to return the next day, taking copies of the party plans with them. The energy between them had transformed, the heavy weight of anticipated grief replaced by something lighter, if still cautious. Alone in her room, Eleanor opened her journal once more, turning to a fresh page. She had documented every treatment, every side effect, every medical development with meticulous care. Now she began a new entry, this one focused not on her disease but on her future. Today, she wrote, my family arrived prepared to plan my ending and left helping me plan my continuation. There is a certain poetry in that reversal that even Dickinson might appreciate. Outside her window, the hospital grounds had fallen into evening shadow, but the distant lights of the city glimmered like possibilities. Eleanor Sullivan, literature professor, cancer patient, mother, and now party planner extraordinaire, closed her journal with a smile that contained equal parts satisfaction and anticipation. They had planned her funeral. She had planned a renaissance. And in the space between those two intentions lay all the difference in the world. The following morning brought a flurry of activity to room 317 of the Oakdale Medical Center's West Wing. By 9:30, Dr. Mendelsohn, Eleanor's primary physician at Oakdale, stood at the foot of her bed, reviewing her chart with the furrowed brow of someone confronting unexpected information. Professor Sullivan, he began, his tone carefully neutral, I understand you've shared some information with your family about an experimental treatment protocol at Rochester Medical Institute. Eleanor set aside the book she'd been reading, a collection of Mary Oliver's poetry that had sustained her through countless treatment days. Yes, I have. I imagine that's caused some confusion in my medical records. Dr. Mendelsohn's expression confirmed her assessment. To say the least. Your son Michael called this morning with quite a few questions that I was unfortunately unable to answer. Because you weren't aware of Dr. Sharma's immunotherapy trial, Eleanor completed the thought. Yes, I imagine that was an uncomfortable conversation. The doctor pulled the visitor's chair closer to her bed and sat down, a departure from his usual practice of remaining standing during his brief morning rounds. This, Eleanor recognized, was going to be a longer discussion. Professor Sullivan, while patients certainly have the right to seek multiple medical opinions and treatment options, coordinating care between institutions is essential for your safety and the effectiveness of any interventions. His tone carried the carefully measured patience of someone explaining something obvious to a person who should know better. You're absolutely right, Eleanor agreed pleasantly. Which is why Dr. Sharma has been sending my complete treatment records, blood work results, and scan reports to your office monthly since April. They're filed under the research protocol consent forms I signed before leaving Oakdale. Dr. Mendelsohn blinked, momentarily thrown by her calm assertion. I haven't seen any such reports. Then I suggest you speak with Nurse Jenkins, who has been ensuring they're properly filed in both my electronic and physical records. Eleanor's smile remained in place, though it had taken on a slightly sharper quality. You'll find them in the supplementary documentation section, where items not directly related to my palliative care have apparently been catalogued. The implication hung in the air between them, that reports showing improvement might have been overlooked or deliberately filed away because they contradicted the expected narrative of her decline. I'll certainly look into that, Dr. Mendelsohn said, making a note in his tablet. In the meantime, I'd like to schedule some additional tests here at Oakdale to verify your current condition. Of course, Eleanor nodded. Though I had a comprehensive scan at Rochester just last week. Dr. Sharma would be happy to discuss the results with you directly. I've signed all the necessary privacy waivers to facilitate that conversation. Dr. Mendelsohn seemed to be recalibrating his approach. The dying literature professor who had quietly accepted her terminal diagnosis had been replaced by someone displaying a thorough understanding of medical protocols and interdepartmental communication procedures. Professor Sullivan, he began again, I want to caution against placing too much hope in experimental treatments. Even if you're showing some response, the aggressive nature of your particular cancer means that outcomes remain uncertain, Eleanor finished for him. Yes, Dr. Sharma has been admirably forthright about the statistics. 27% of participants show significant tumor reduction. 40% show minimal response. The remainder show no improvement. I'm fortunate to fall into the first category thus far. She reached for her journal on the bedside table, opening to the tabbed section where she kept her medical documentation. My last 3 scans show a 43% reduction in tumor mass. My blood markers have improved by 60% since beginning the protocol. The metastasis to my lymphatic system appears to be receding rather than advancing. Dr. Mendelsohn accepted the journal with evident surprise, reviewing the detailed notes and the copies of medical reports Eleanor had carefully pasted into its pages. These results are significant, he acknowledged, his professional demeanor giving way to genuine interest as he studied the data. They're not a guarantee, Eleanor said, her voice softening slightly. I'm not naive about the challenges ahead. But they represent something I didn't have 6 months ago, a genuine possibility of more time. The doctor returned her journal, his expression thoughtful. I'd still like to run our own tests to confirm these findings. I welcome the verification, Eleanor said. Though I would appreciate a more collaborative approach moving forward. I'm neither a passive victim of this disease nor a miracle case to be marveled at. I'm simply a patient actively participating in my own treatment decisions. Dr. Mendelsohn nodded slowly, a new respect evident in his expression. I'll coordinate with Dr. Sharma's team today and schedule our follow-up tests for later this week. After he left, Eleanor returned to her poetry, but found her attention drifting. The conversation had crystallized something she'd been feeling since beginning the experimental treatment, the subtle but persistent way in which her agency had been gradually eroded as she moved from person to patient to terminal case. Dr. Mendelsohn was neither cruel nor dismissive. He was simply accustomed to a particular trajectory for patients with her diagnosis, one that moved inevitably toward managed decline and palliative comfort. Her deviation from that expected path had disrupted not just her family's preparation for her death, but the medical staff's professional framework for her care. By mid-morning, her room had become the center of unusual activity. Nurse Jenkins arrived with a stack of medical files, the complete documentation from Rochester that had indeed been in Eleanor's records all along, properly filed but apparently unreviewed by her primary physician. Dr. Mendelsohn seems quite interested in these suddenly, Nurse Jenkins observed with the dry humor that had made her Eleanor's favorite among the hospital staff. Yes, it's remarkable how a patient's insistence on being alive can capture medical attention, Eleanor replied, causing the nurse to suppress a smile. By noon, Rebecca had arrived, carrying a large portfolio and wearing the determined expression that Eleanor recognized from her daughter's college days before major presentations. I've been researching caterers, she announced without preamble, setting the portfolio on Eleanor's adjustable table. Claudia's is excellent, but if we're having over 200 guests, we might want to consider Morrison's. They handled the university president's retirement gala last year, and everyone said the food was exceptional. Eleanor watched with quiet amusement as her daughter, who less than 24 hours ago had been contemplating funeral arrangements, now attacked party planning with the same focused energy. You've been busy, Eleanor observed, leafing through the catering brochures Rebecca had compiled. Michael's looking into venues, Rebecca continued, pulling out her phone to check messages. He thinks the university hall is perfect symbolically, but he's concerned about accessibility for some of your older colleagues. He's investigating the Riverside Cultural Center as an alternative. Better parking, no stairs, and apparently their spring calendar just had a cancellation. The rapid pivot from funeral to festival might have seemed jarring to an outside observer, but Eleanor recognized it as a quintessentially Sullivan family trait, the ability to redirect organizational energy when circumstances changed. The Same determination that had once been focused on managing her death was now being applied to celebrating her life. And Lily? Eleanor asked, wondering how her teenage granddaughter was processing the dramatic shift. Creating a playlist, Rebecca smiled. She says the jazz quartet is fine for dinner, but the after-party needs, and I quote, music from this century. She's collaborating with your former student Brandon, who apparently works as a DJ now. Eleanor laughed. Brandon Williams. Brilliant. Analysis of Austin's use of free indirect discourse, terrible handwriting, graduated about 7 years ago. How on earth did Lily find him? Instagram, I think? Rebecca shrugged. She said he posts about you sometimes, favorite professor. Quotes or something. She reached out this morning and they've been texting about music that spans generations. The casual way Rebecca mentioned this, her daughter connecting with one of Eleanor's former students through social media to plan music for a party that was replacing a funeral, struck Eleanor as surreal in the most wonderful way. Mom, Rebecca said, her activity momentarily paused as she looked directly at Eleanor. I owe you an apology. Eleanor set aside the catering menus. For what, exactly? For planning your funeral without consulting you. For treating you like you were already gone in some ways. For not. She hesitated, searching for the right words, for not seeing you completely. I think, Eleanor said carefully, that it's very difficult to see someone fully when you're preparing to lose them. Grief creates a certain kind of tunnel vision. Still, Rebecca insisted, we should have talked with you about the arrangements, included you in the decisions. Instead, we just assumed that I was too fragile to discuss my own mortality. Eleanor completed the thought. Yes, that was rather presumptuous. Though not entirely unexpected. Rebecca looked surprised. What do you mean? Eleanor considered how to explain the subtle shift she'd experienced over the past year. The gradual way in which her identity had been eroded by her diagnosis. When you're diagnosed with terminal illness, she began, you move through phases of identity. First, you're a person who has cancer. Then, you become a cancer patient. Eventually, to many people, you're simply dying, a repository for their grief and anxiety, a problem to be managed with increasing levels of medical intervention and decreasing expectations of agency. Rebecca looked stricken. Mom, we never thought of you that way. Not consciously, perhaps, Eleanor acknowledged. But tell me honestly, before yesterday, when was the last time you asked for my opinion about anything important? When did Michael last mention a work challenge? When did Lily share her college anxieties with me? The silence that followed confirmed what Eleanor had observed over the past months, the gradual way in which meaningful information had stopped flowing to her, replaced by cheerful reports and carefully edited updates designed not to tax her supposedly limited energy. We were trying to protect you, Rebecca said quietly. I know, Eleanor's smile held no resentment. And in your position, I might have done the same. But protection can become its own kind of prison when it prevents genuine connection. The arrival of Nurse Jenkins with Eleanor's medication provided a momentary pause in the conversation. As the nurse checked vital signs and administered the daily medications that supported Eleanor's ongoing treatment, Rebecca watched with new attention. How long have you known, she asked the nurse directly. About my mother's experimental treatment and improvement? Nurse Jenkins glanced at Eleanor, who nodded permission to answer. Since the beginning, she replied simply. Your mother needed someone here to monitor for interactions between her standard medications and the trial protocol. Dr. Sharma requested daily observation notes to supplement the twice-monthly treatment sessions. And you never thought her family should know? There was an edge to Rebecca's question. It wasn't my information to share, Nurse Jenkins replied, her professional demeanor unruffled. Professor Sullivan made her wishes very clear regarding confidentiality. As her medical provider, I respected those wishes. After the nurse departed, Rebecca turned back to Eleanor with a mixture of hurt and confusion. Did you not trust us with the truth? It wasn't about trust, Eleanor said gently. It was about hope, which can be both precious and painful. I couldn't bear the thought of giving you hope and then having it destroyed if the treatments failed. And selfishly, perhaps, I needed space to process my own response to the possibility of more time. What do you mean? Eleanor gestured toward the window, where autumn leaves drifted past. I had made my peace with dying, Rebecca. I had organized my affairs, said my mental goodbyes, prepared myself for an ending. When the possibility of continuation appeared, it wasn't a simple matter of celebration. It required a complete reorientation of my thinking. She reached for the poetry book she'd set aside earlier, running her fingers along its worn cover. Mary Oliver asks, tell me, what is it you plan to do with your one wild and precious life? It's a question that carries different weight when you believe your life is ending versus when you discover it might continue. Rebecca was quiet for a moment, absorbing this perspective. And did you find an answer? I'm working on it. Eleanor smiled. The Renaissance party is part of that answer. So is being honest with all of you about where I am now, medically, emotionally, practically. I'm neither dying according to schedule nor miraculously cured. I'm in the uncertain middle ground where nothing is guaranteed except the present moment. The afternoon brought more visitors, colleagues from the university English department who had been making weekly visits since Eleanor's move to Oakdale. Professor Lewis and Professor Garcia arrived with their usual offering of books and academic gossip, but their expressions showed they'd already heard rumors of Eleanor's improved condition. Is it true? Sofia Garcia asked without preamble, setting a stack of literary journals on the side table. Marcus in biology mentioned something about an experimental treatment showing results. Eleanor couldn't help but smile at the speed of academic grapevine. News travels fast, I see. This is a university, Raymond Lewis replied dryly. Gossip is our primary form of communication. Is it true? It appears so, Eleanor confirmed. Though with all the usual caveats about experimental protocols and statistical uncertainty. Her colleagues exchanged glances that contained equal parts joy and uncertainty, the complicated response of people who had been preparing to lose a friend and now faced the prospect of not having to do so. Well, Sophia said finally, this certainly changes our plans for the department memorial lecture series we were organizing in your honor. Perhaps you could transform it into a Festschrift instead, Eleanor suggested. I've always wanted one of those pretentious academic tribute volumes. All the best scholars get them eventually. Raymond laughed, the sound carrying genuine relief. From memorial to Festschrift, a scholarly upgrade indeed. As her colleagues began to share department updates without the careful filtering that had characterized recent visits, Eleanor felt another piece of her pre-diagnosis identity returning. They were speaking to her as Professor Sullivan again, a colleague with valid opinions about curriculum changes and faculty politics, rather than as a dying friend to be gently humored. By evening, when Michael arrived with Lily, Eleanor's room had begun to transform. The sympathy cards had been gathered into a drawer, replaced by catering menus, venue brochures, and the beginnings of a guest list that Lily was transferring to a spreadsheet on her laptop. Grandma, Lily announced, settling cross-legged on the foot of Eleanor's bed with teenage familiarity, I've been thinking about themes for your Renaissance party. Have you now? Eleanor adjusted her position to see Lily's laptop screen. And what have you concluded? Well, an actual Renaissance theme seemed too obvious, you know, people in those weird collar things eating turkey legs. Lily made a face that caused both Eleanor and Michael to laugh. So I was thinking something more conceptual. What about plot twist? Eleanor raised an eyebrow. Elaborate, please. It's literary, which fits you as an English professor, Lily explained, warming to her idea. And it's literally what happened. Everyone thought the story was going one way, and then, plot twist. It went somewhere completely different. Michael, who had been quietly reviewing venue information on his tablet, looked up with surprise. That's actually quite clever, Lily. Don't sound so shocked, Dad. Lily rolled her eyes with teenage indignation. I did inherit Grandma's literary genes, you know. Plot twist, Eleanor repeated, considering the concept. I rather like it. We could incorporate famous literary reversals of fortune in the decorations. Perhaps quote Dickens, it was the best of times, it was the worst of times. Or we could go with Mark Twain, Michael suggested unexpectedly. The reports of my death have been greatly exaggerated. Eleanor looked at her son with surprise. Michael, the practical business consultant who organized his life with spreadsheets and 5-year plans, had just quoted Twain with perfect contextual application. What? He asked, noticing her expression. I did pay some attention in your impromptu literature lessons growing up. This small moment, her son revealing knowledge she hadn't realized he'd retained, felt significant in ways Eleanor couldn't immediately articulate. It was as if the disruption of their expected narrative had created space for revelations on multiple levels. Plot twist it is, she decided. A celebration of unexpected continuations and revised endings. As visiting hours ended and her family prepared to leave, Eleanor found herself reflecting on the day's transformations. In the span of 24 hours, her room had shifted from a space of impending loss to one of tentative planning. The conversations had changed from carefully edited updates to genuine exchanges of ideas and information. Most significantly, she was being seen differently, not as a fading patient, but as an active participant in both her medical care and her family's future. Same time tomorrow? Michael asked, gathering his notes on potential venues. I should have more concrete information about the Riverside Cultural Center by then. I'll be here, Eleanor confirmed, the simple statement carrying weight beyond It's surface meaning. Though actually, I've been meaning to discuss with both of you, I may not need to be at Oakdale much longer. Rebecca and Michael exchanged glances. What do you mean? Rebecca asked carefully. Dr. Sharma believes I might be able to continue treatments on an outpatient basis within the next few weeks, assuming the current progress continues. Eleanor kept her tone matter-of-fact, though the prospect of leaving the hospital environment that had been her home for months carried its own emotional complexity. You'd come home? Michael's question contained equal parts hope and practical concern. Is that medically advisable? With proper home healthcare support, yes, Eleanor explained. I'd still need transportation the following morning found. Eleanor Sullivan seated at the window of her hospital room, watching the golden autumn light change the colors of the maple trees lining the hospital grounds. The past 48 hours had altered everything, not her medical condition, which had been improving gradually for months, but the way people responded to that condition. It was as if she had crossed an invisible boundary between the realm of the dying and the territory of the living, and everyone around her was recalibrating. Accordingly, a knock at her door interrupted her contemplation. Dr. Anita Sharma stood in the doorway, her crisp white coat and confident posture a striking contrast to Dr. Mendelssohn's more hesitant demeanor. May I come in, Eleanor? She asked, though they both knew this wasn't merely a social call. The appearance of her Rochester Medical Institute doctor at Oakdale signaled a convergence of her two medical worlds, something Eleanor had been both expecting and dreading. Anita, Eleanor smiled, gesturing to the visitor's chair. I assume Dr. Mendelssohn reached out to you? With remarkable urgency, Dr. Sharma confirmed, settling into the chair with the relaxed posture of someone comfortable in medical environments. At 42, she had already established herself as a leading researcher in experimental cancer treatments, with a reputation for both brilliant research protocols and uncompromising honesty with her patients. He seemed rather surprised by your progress, Eleanor observed mildly. Dr. Sharma's expression remained neutral, but her eyes conveyed understanding of the understatement. I've shared your complete file with him. All scans, lab work, and treatment notes from the past 6 months, though I understand you've kept quite detailed records yourself. Eleanor glanced at her journal on the bedside table. A professor's habit. Documentation is second nature after 30 years of academic research. Well, your documentation has proven valuable. Dr. Mendelssohn and I have agreed on a collaborative approach moving forward. Dr. Sharma paused, studying Eleanor with the careful attention that had made her such an effective physician. Though I understand your family was unaware of your participation in our trial until very recently. The observation carried no judgment, but Eleanor felt the need to explain nonetheless. I made a decision not to burden them with hope that might prove false. The statistics for this treatment aren't exactly overwhelmingly positive. 27% significant response rate, Dr. Sharma nodded. Though you're currently outperforming even our most optimistic projections for those in the positive response category. Eleanor had known this, of course, had tracked every percentage change in her tumor markers, had compared her results to the anonymized data Dr. Sharma shared about other trial participants. But hearing it stated so directly by her physician still caused a flutter of emotion she couldn't quite name. What does that mean in practical terms? Eleanor asked, her professor's precision seeking clarity beyond medical jargon. Dr. Sharma leaned forward slightly, her expression serious but not grave. It means we're seeing something remarkable but not yet fully understood. Your cancer hasn't disappeared, Eleanor. But it's retreating in ways that suggest your immune system is finally recognizing and attacking it effectively. Thanks to your treatment protocol. Partially, Dr. Sharma agreed. But there's something else happening. Something unique to your particular physiology and how it's interacting with the immunotherapy. We're still analyzing the specifics. Eleanor absorbed this information with the same methodical attention she had once applied to analyzing complex literary texts. And the prognosis? Still uncertain, Dr. Sharma admitted. But significantly more positive than 6 months ago. Where we once measured your remaining time in months, we're now looking at the possibility of years. Years. The word hung in the air between them, heavy with implication. Not a complete reprieve, not a miracle cure, but something precious nonetheless. Time that Eleanor had not expected to have. I'd like to move you to outpatient status within the next 2 weeks, Dr. Sharma continued. You'd continue the immunotherapy protocol at Rochester twice monthly, with regular monitoring at Oakdale in between sessions. Dr. Mendelssohn has agreed to oversee your local care with direct consultation from our team. And my family? Eleanor asked. What should I tell them about long-term expectations? Dr. Sharma considered this carefully. Tell them the truth, that we're seeing remarkable progress but cannot make definitive predictions. That your condition requires ongoing treatment and monitoring. That while we have reason for optimism, we're still navigating uncertainty. Eleanor nodded, appreciating the honesty. In a medical journey filled with statistics and probabilities, straightforward truth was its own form of kindness. And, Eleanor, Dr. Sharma added as she prepared to leave, you might consider that your decision to pursue this experimental treatment without involving your family was itself a form of protection, not just of them, but perhaps of yourself as well. After the doctor left, Eleanor returned to her window seat, considering this observation. Had she been protecting herself by keeping her treatment secret? The question was uncomfortable precisely because it contained elements of truth. By not telling her family about the experimental protocol, she had created a space where hope could exist without the pressure of their expectations or the weight of their disappointment if treatments failed. Now that space had collapsed, and hope had become a shared commodity, more vibrant perhaps, but also more complicated. Her reflection was interrupted by the arrival of Mrs. Peterson from her book club, a sprightly 74-year-old who had been driving Eleanor to her Rochester treatments since the beginning. Well, Mrs. Peterson announced, setting her voluminous handbag on the visitor's chair, the secret's out, I hear. How are you handling the transition from dying woman to medical marvel? Eleanor laughed at her friend's characteristic bluntness. Hardly a marvel, Margaret. And not quite done with dying, just proceeding on a more extended timeline. Extended enough to make your children completely reconsider their funeral arrangements, from what I gather. Mrs. Peterson's eyes twinkled with the particular satisfaction of someone who had been party to a significant revelation. Michael called me this morning, you know. Wanted to thank me for driving you to treatments all these months. Did he now? Eleanor was surprised. Michael's practical nature rarely extended to such gestures. Indeed. Though I think he was also fishing for information about why you kept it from them. Mrs. Peterson removed her driving gloves with deliberate precision. I told him he'd have to ask you himself. Some questions deserve direct answers. Eleanor smiled at her friend's loyalty. And how is our book club managing without me? Has anyone actually finished Proust, or are you all still pretending to read him while secretly discussing television shows? Eleanor Sullivan, you know perfectly well that I have read Proust in his entirety, twice, in fact. Mrs. Peterson's mock indignation gave way to a genuine smile. Though I'll admit several members were relieved when we moved on to Wolf last month. We're saving your beloved Austen for when you return. The casual mention of her return to book club activities, as if it were a certainty rather than a hope, struck Eleanor with unexpected force. This was the power of shared expectation, she realized. Once people believed in your continuation, they began creating space for you in their future plans. Now, Mrs. Peterson continued, pulling a folder from her enormous handbag, I understand. There's to be a Renaissance celebration rather than a memorial service. The book club would like to take responsibility for the literary quotations and thematic elements. We've prepared some preliminary suggestions. The folder contained neatly typed pages of literary passages about rebirth, renewal, and unexpected turns of fortune, everything from classic poetry to contemporary fiction, organized by potential use, invitations, program notes, table centerpieces, even projected wall displays. Margaret, this is remarkable, Eleanor said, genuinely touched by the effort. We're literature people, dear. When one of our own defies medical expectations, we respond with appropriate textual references. Mrs. Peterson's matter-of-fact tone belied the emotion behind her words. Besides, it gave us something constructive to do with all the anxiety we've been carrying about you these past months. As Mrs. Peterson shared the book club's ideas for literary-themed decorations and quotation placements, Eleanor was struck by the rapid transformation of her narrative from tragedy to something more complex and ultimately more hopeful. The same energy that had been directed toward preparing for her death was now being channeled into celebrating her continued life, a pivot that revealed much about how humans process grief and hope. By mid-afternoon, Eleanor's hospital room had become an impromptu planning headquarters. Rebecca arrived with fabric swatches for table settings. Michael followed with detailed quotes from 3 potential venues. Lily contributed digital mock-ups of invitation designs featuring literary, plot twist, quotes. Even Dr. Mendelsohn stopped by, ostensibly to discuss medication adjustments but lingering to comment on the party preparations with unexpected enthusiasm. The Riverside Cultural Center has excellent acoustics, he noted, examining Michael's venue information. My daughter's orchestra performed there last spring. The sound quality is remarkable. Eleanor observed this transformation with a mixture of amusement and wonder. Her physician, who less than 48 hours ago had been managing her presumed decline, was now offering venue recommendations for her celebration of life. Your renaissance appears to be infectious, Nurse Jenkins commented quietly as she checked Eleanor's vital signs amid the planning activity. I haven't seen Dr. Mendelsohn this animated since the hospital received that new MRI machine. People respond to possibility, Eleanor replied. It's a more energizing force than inevitability. Speaking of possibility, Nurse Jenkins said, lowering her voice, Dr. Sharma left preliminary discharge planning papers at the nurse's station. 2 weeks maximum, if your next set of tests confirms the current trends. The prospect of leaving Oakdale, of returning to her own home, her own space, created a complicated flutter of emotions. The hospital had become a sanctuary of sorts, a place where her needs were anticipated and met without question. The outside world would require different kinds of navigation, different strengths. As if sensing this ambivalence, Nurse Jenkins added, We'll put together a comprehensive home care plan. You won't be doing this alone. By evening, as her family gathered their planning materials and prepared to leave, Eleanor found herself contemplating the stark contrast between their current energy and the somber mood that had characterized their visits just days before. The shift wasn't just in their behavior toward her, but in how they interacted with each other, more collaborative, less tentative, united by purpose rather than grief. Before you go, Eleanor said, gathering their attention, I'd like to discuss something important. They settled back into their chairs, expressions shifting to concern, a reflexive response to her serious tone. Dr. Sharma and I spoke this morning about my potential discharge in approximately 2 weeks, she began, watching their reactions carefully. If my condition continues to improve, I'll be transitioning to outpatient treatment status. That's wonderful news, Rebecca said immediately, though Eleanor didn't miss the quick glance she exchanged with Michael, a look that contained practical questions about logistics and care. It is, Eleanor agreed. But it also represents a significant adjustment for all of us. For 6 months, we've been operating under one set of expectations. Now we're pivoting to something quite different. You mean the fact that we thought you were dying and now you might not be? Lily asked with her characteristic directness. Exactly, Eleanor nodded. And while that's obviously positive, it requires recalibration, not just of practical matters like medical care and living arrangements, but of how we relate to each other. Michael leaned forward, his consultant's mind already analyzing problems and solutions. What do you need from us, Mom? The question was simple but profound. What did she need? Not what did they think she needed, or what would be convenient for them to provide, but what did she actually require to navigate this unexpected continuation of her story? I need 3 things, Eleanor said, having considered this carefully throughout the day. First, I need transparency. No more protection through omission. I want to know what's happening in your lives, the challenges, the disappointments, the questions, not just the sanitized good news deemed appropriate for a sick mother. Her children nodded, though she saw the flicker of discomfort that suggested they recognized how they had indeed been filtering their communications. Second, I need agency. As I recover, I'll be reclaiming aspects of independence that have been necessarily compromised during hospitalization. That might sometimes mean declining help or choosing approaches different from what you might recommend. This request visibly concerned Michael, whose protective instincts had always manifested as practical problem-solving. Even if those choices might not be medically optimal? Even then, Eleanor confirmed. Though I promised to consult with my medical team before making any truly significant decisions. The point is that I need to be the author of my own recovery, not merely its subject. And third? Rebecca asked. I need normalcy, Eleanor said simply. Not the artificial cheerfulness of hospital visits, nor the excessive caution of treating me as perpetually fragile. I need to be Eleanor again, professor, mother, grandmother, friend, not just cancer patient or medical miracle. The request hung in the air, its implications reaching beyond her immediate family to how she would reintegrate into her broader social and professional worlds. That seems reasonable, Rebecca said slowly. Though it might take some practice for all of us. Practice is exactly what I'm suggesting, Eleanor smiled. We have an opportunity to establish new patterns now, before I leave Oakdale. To create a foundation for whatever comes next. As her family departed with promises to return the following day, Eleanor felt a sense of accomplishment that had nothing to do with medical statistics or party planning. She had articulated her needs clearly and directly, something she might not have done 6 months ago, when the habits of maternal accommodation were still deeply ingrained. Alone in her room, Eleanor opened her journal to a fresh page. Since beginning Dr. Sharma's treatment protocol, she had documented every physical symptom, every medical development with meticulous precision. Now she found herself writing something different, not medical observations but personal reflections. The most unexpected aspect of my improving condition, she wrote, is not the physical changes but the relational ones. How quickly people pivot from grief to hope, from protection to collaboration, from endings to beginnings. And how this pivot reveals truths about our connections that might otherwise remain hidden. She paused, considering what had been revealed in the past 48 hours. Her son's surprising literary knowledge. Her daughter's organizational skills redirected from funeral to festival. Her granddaughter's perceptive understanding of symbolism. Her colleague's relief manifesting as academic engagement. Her physician's capacity to recalibrate from palliative care to active treatment. Perhaps, she continued writing, this is the gift hidden within medical uncertainty, the clarity it brings to what matters and how we wish to live within whatever time remains, be it months or years. Not a gift I would have chosen, certainly, but one with its own peculiar value nonetheless. Outside her window, the hospital grounds had fallen into evening shadow, but the distant lights of the city created a gentle illumination, neither full darkness nor complete light, but something in between. It struck Eleanor as an apt metaphor. For her current state, not dying according to schedule, not fully recovered, but occupying a middle space rich with its own complex possibilities. The following week brought a flurry of medical tests as Dr. Mendelsohn and Dr. Sharma collaborated to establish Eleanor's baseline health status in preparation for her potential discharge. Blood draws, imaging scans, physical assessments, each designed to measure different aspects of her response to the immunotherapy protocol and her overall physiological stability. Eleanor approached these tests with the same methodical attention she had once brought to analyzing complex literary texts. She asked questions, took notes, requested copies of results, no longer the passive recipient of medical care but an active participant in understanding her own condition. You'd make an excellent medical student, Dr. Sharma observed after Eleanor had engaged her in a detailed discussion about the relationship between her immune markers and tumor regression patterns. Your analytical skills are impressive. Just a literature professor applying close reading techniques to laboratory reports, Eleanor replied. Text is text, whether it's Austin or antibody measurements. Between medical appointments, the Renaissance celebration planning continued to evolve. What had begun as a simple party concept had expanded into something more meaningful, a genuine marking of transition, not just for Eleanor but for everyone connected to her. Professor Abernathy from the music department arrived one afternoon with preliminary recordings from his jazz quartet, along with suggestions for a musical program that would span Eleanor's lifetime, from the classical pieces she had grown up with through the jazz she had discovered in college to contemporary compositions that reflected her ongoing engagement with cultural evolution. Music marks time in a unique way, he explained as they listened to his quartet's rendition of a particularly meaningful Gershwin piece. It allows us to experience both memory and present moments simultaneously. The English department faculty had formed their own committee, focusing on creating a commemorative book that would include academic tributes, personal reflections, and selections from Eleanor's own scholarly work. Professor Garcia arrived with a draft layout, proudly showing Eleanor the contributions already submitted from colleagues across the country. Your influence extends far beyond Westfield, she said, indicating messages from former students now teaching at universities throughout the world. Your work on narrative theory has shaped an entire generation of literary scholars. Even Dr. Mendelsohn had become unexpectedly invested in the celebration, offering the hospital's audiovisual equipment for a planned video presentation and suggesting contacts at the local newspaper who might cover the event as a human interest story. Medical science advances through understanding exceptional responses, he explained when Eleanor expressed surprise at his enthusiasm. Your case represents something important, not just clinically but in how we approach patient communication and treatment expectations. By the weekend, as the discharge planning process gained momentum, Eleanor found herself in the curious position of preparing for both a homecoming and a Renaissance celebration, two events that marked her transition from one state of being to another. Rebecca arrived Saturday morning with a detailed checklist for home modifications, grab bars for the bathroom, a first-floor bedroom arrangement to minimize stair usage, kitchen reorganization for easier meal preparation. The home health agency Dr. Sharma recommended can provide daily assistance initially, she explained, reviewing service options on her tablet. We can adjust the schedule as your strength improves. Eleanor listened to these practical arrangements with a mixture of gratitude and mild amusement. Her daughter's organizational efficiency was being channeled into creating systems that would support Eleanor's independence rather than replace it, a subtle but significant distinction. And I've spoken with the university about a phased return to teaching, Rebecca continued. They're suggesting one seminar next semester, perhaps your narrative theory course with limited enrollment. Dean Wilson was quite enthusiastic about the possibility. This information caught Eleanor by surprise. A return to teaching had seemed so distant a prospect that she had filed it away as something to consider in some indefinite future. Yet, here was Rebecca, already negotiating with academic administration about course assignments and teaching schedules. "You've been busy," Eleanor observed, trying to process the implications. "Too much?" Rebecca asked, suddenly concerned. "I didn't mean to presume. I just thought." "No," Eleanor interrupted gently. "Not too much. Just unexpected. I haven't allowed myself to think that far ahead." Rebecca set aside her tablet, studying her mother with new attention. "That's the difference, isn't it? Between when we thought you were dying and now. The scope of planning. The horizon of possibility." It was a perceptive observation, one that captured something essential about Eleanor's experience of the past week. When death had seemed imminent, planning extended only to final arrangements and goodbyes. Now plans involved home modifications, teaching schedules, departmental commitments, the infrastructure of ongoing life. "It's disorienting," Eleanor admitted. "Like suddenly having to consider a future I had already relinquished." "Is it unwelcome?" Rebecca asked carefully. "The need to reconsider?" Eleanor thought about this, appreciating her daughter's willingness to ask difficult questions. "Not unwelcome," she said finally. "But complex. I had made a certain peace with ending. Now I need to make peace with continuing, with all the uncertainty and responsibility that entails." The conversation might have continued in this philosophical vein had Michael and Lily not arrived, carrying takeout lunch from Eleanor's favorite Thai restaurant, a small but significant departure from the hospital's bland dietary offerings. "Dr. Sharma approved it," Michael announced, unpacking containers of fragrant curry and noodles. "Said something about quality of life being an important component of overall health." As they shared this impromptu family meal in Eleanor's hospital room, the conversation flowed with a naturalness that had been absent in recent months, Michael discussing a challenging work project, Rebecca sharing frustrations about her graduate studies, Lily detailing her college application anxieties. Normal family topics, presented without filtering or protective omission. Eleanor recognized this for what it was, her family's first attempt to honor her request for transparency and normalcy. They were no longer treating her as a dying woman to be protected from life's complications, but as a continuing presence, entitled to full participation in family realities. "Mom," Michael said as they finished lunch, "there's something I wanted to ask you about the Renaissance celebration." "Yes?" Eleanor noted the slight hesitation in his voice, unusual for her typically decisive son. "Would you consider making it a combined event? Your Renaissance and your 70th birthday? The timing would work, your birthday is only 3 weeks after the planned date." The request surprised Eleanor. Her birthday had always been a relatively quiet affair, acknowledged with cards and perhaps a small family dinner. The idea of combining it with the already elaborate Renaissance celebration seemed unusual, especially coming from practical Michael. "May I ask why?" she inquired, genuinely curious about his reasoning. Michael glanced at Rebecca, who nodded encouragement. "Because I'd like the opportunity to celebrate both your continuation and your beginning," he said finally. "To acknowledge not just that you're still here, but all that you've been to us for 70 years. The unexpected sentiment from her typically reserved son touched Eleanor deeply. There was something profound in his desire to mark both her survival and her existence, to celebrate not just the avoidance of an ending but the totality of a life still in progress. "I'd like that," she said simply, reaching for his hand. As the afternoon progressed and her family eventually departed, Eleanor found herself reflecting on the layers of transition unfolding around her. The medical transition from inpatient to outpatient status. The physical transition from hospital to home. The social transition from dying patient to continuing participant. The emotional transition from acceptance of ending to engagement with continuation. Each layer brought its own challenges and opportunities, its own fears and possibilities. Yet underlying all of them was a fundamental shift in narrative, from a story with a known ending to one whose conclusion remained unwritten. When Nurse Jenkins arrived for evening medication rounds, she found Eleanor at her window seat, watching the sunset paint the autumn trees in deepening shades of gold and crimson. "Penny for your thoughts, Professor?" she asked, preparing the evening medications. With practiced efficiency. Eleanor smiled at the familiar phrase. "I was thinking about narrative structures, actually. About how we organize stories and experiences." "Very on-brand for a literature professor," Nurse Jenkins observed with a smile. "Any particular narrative catching your attention?" "I'm considering the difference between tragedy and comedy." "In the classical sense," Eleanor replied. "Not humor versus sadness, but structure and resolution." Tragedies move inevitably toward a predetermined end: death, downfall, destruction. Comedies remain open, allowing for reversals, reconciliations, continued life. And you're experiencing a genre shift, Nurse Jenkins suggested, displaying the kind of literary understanding that had made her Eleanor's favorite among the hospital staff. Exactly, Eleanor nodded, appreciating the nurse's perception. For months, everyone, including me, has been reading my story as tragedy. Now we're all frantically revising it into something else. A comedy, perhaps, or at least a narrative with a less predetermined conclusion. Nurse Jenkins considered this as she recorded Eleanor's vital signs in the electronic chart. And how does the protagonist feel about this unexpected revision? It was the question Eleanor had been asking herself throughout the week. How did she truly feel about this narrative shift? Beyond the obvious relief of improved medical prognosis, beyond the practical adjustments of extended planning horizons, what was her emotional response to this fundamental change in her story's direction? Grateful, she said after a moment. But also, responsible? When you're dying according to schedule, your obligations narrow to very specific tasks: putting affairs in order, saying appropriate goodbyes, making peace with ending. When that schedule is disrupted, all the open-ended responsibilities of living return. And those responsibilities feel heavy? Nurse Jenkins asked, her tone free of judgment. Not heavy, exactly, Eleanor clarified. But significant. If I'm going to continue, I want that continuation to have meaning, for myself and for others. I want to use whatever time remains with purpose and intention. The nurse nodded, understanding the distinction. So the Renaissance celebration isn't just about marking your medical improvement. It's about declaring an intention for whatever comes next. Yes, Eleanor said, surprised and pleased by the insight. It's both acknowledgement and commitment, recognizing what has changed and stating what I intend to do with that change. As darkness fell outside her window, Eleanor Sullivan, professor, patient, protagonist in a story undergoing significant revision, felt a growing clarity about her next chapter. Whatever its length, whatever its challenges, she would approach it with the same analytical intelligence and emotional honesty that had characterized her response to illness. The plot twist in her medical narrative had created an opportunity not just for extended time, but for deepened purpose. The Renaissance would celebrate not merely survival but intentional continuation, a commitment to living whatever remained of her story with full awareness of its preciousness and potential. The morning of Eleanor Sullivan's discharge from Oakdale Medical Center arrived with the kind of crystalline autumn clarity that seemed almost deliberately symbolic. Golden light filtered through her hospital room window, illuminating the space that had been her home for months but would, by afternoon, become merely a memory. Ready for the grand exodus? Nurse Jenkins asked, entering with discharge paperwork and a wheelchair, the latter a hospital policy requirement that Eleanor had initially resisted but ultimately accepted with good-natured resignation. As ready as one can be for re-entry. Into the world, Eleanor replied, already dressed in clothing Rebecca had brought the previous day, tailored slacks and a cashmere sweater that felt luxuriously different from hospital gowns. The outfit was part of her deliberate approach to this transition, not the comfortable loungewear of a returning patient, but the dignified attire of a professor reclaiming her identity. Dr. Mendelsohn arrived for a final consultation, carrying Eleanor's substantial medical file and wearing the satisfied expression of a physician seeing an unexpected positive outcome. Your vitals are stable, blood work is showing continued improvement, and Dr. Sharma is pleased with your most recent scan results, he reported, reviewing the discharge instructions with professional thoroughness. You'll continue the immunotherapy protocol at Rochester on the established schedule, with monitoring appointments here at Oakdale in between treatments. He handed her a thick folder containing medication schedules, dietary recommendations, activity guidelines, and contact information for various specialists involved in her care. The home health team will visit daily initially, transitioning to 3 times weekly as your strength improves. Your first follow-up appointment with me is scheduled for next Wednesday. Eleanor accepted the folder, noting how the doctor's language and demeanor had shifted over the past 2 weeks, from the gentle euphemisms of terminal care to the practical directives of ongoing treatment. Another example of narrative revision in action. Thank you, she said simply, for your care and your adaptability. Dr. Mendelsohn seemed momentarily surprised by this acknowledgement. It's been educational, he admitted. Your case has challenged some of my assumptions about prognosis and patient communication. Good, Eleanor smiled. Challenging assumptions is what professors do best. By mid-morning, her room had been transformed. The sympathy cards and farewell gifts had been packed away, replaced by practical items for her homecoming, medication organizers, appointment calendars, and a new journal for the next phase. of her documentation. The oxygen tank that had been a constant companion during her weakest periods was now replaced by a small portable unit for use only as needed. Michael arrived precisely at 11, his punctuality reflecting both his natural efficiency and the significance of the occasion. "The house is ready," he reported, helping gather Eleanor's belongings. "Rebecca's there now with the home health nurse for the initial assessment and setup." "And how does it look?" Eleanor asked, curious about the modifications to her beloved Victorian home, the place she had shared with her late husband for 30 years and had continued to maintain as both residence and personal library after his death. "Different," Michael admitted. "But still yours. We've been careful to balance the medical necessities with preserving the essential character of your space." This thoughtful response reflected her son's growing understanding of what mattered to her, not just physical functionality but the maintenance of identity and dignity in the face of necessary changes. The journey from hospital room to main entrance was itself a form of transition ritual. Nurses stopped to offer goodbyes. Dr. Sharma made a surprise appearance, having driven from Rochester to mark the occasion. Even hospital staff Eleanor barely knew smiled and nodded as she passed, the departing miracle patient whose improvement had become something of a legend in Oakdale's oncology wing. "You've developed quite a fan club," Michael observed as they approached the main doors where his car waited. "People need hope in medical environments," Eleanor replied. "Sometimes they find it in unexpected improvements, even when those improvements come with all the usual caveats and uncertainties." The drive home through Westfield's tree-lined streets provided Eleanor with her first extended view of the outside world in months. The university campus with its Gothic architecture and autumn-painted quad. The downtown area where local shops displayed Halloween decorations alongside harvest themes. The residential neighborhoods where life continued in its ordinary, precious rhythms. "Everything looks both exactly the same and completely different," she observed, watching a group of children in a playground they passed. Michael glanced at her briefly before returning his attention to the road. "That's how I felt when you told us about the experimental treatment. Same mother, completely different future." The observation was unexpectedly perceptive coming from her practically minded son, and Eleanor felt a rush of appreciation for the depth of thought hiding beneath his efficient exterior. When they turned onto Maple Street and her Victorian home came into view, Eleanor felt an emotional surge that took her by surprise. The wraparound porch with its hanging ferns. The stained glass panels flanking the front door. The Japanese maple in the front yard now blazing in autumn red. Home, not just as physical space but as extension of self. "Welcome back, Michael," said simply as he parked in the driveway. The front door opened before they reached it, revealing Rebecca and Lily waiting on the porch. Behind them stood a tall woman in scrubs who Eleanor assumed was the home health nurse, along with several neighbors holding a hand-painted banner that read, "Welcome home, Professor Sullivan." "They insisted," Rebecca whispered as she embraced her mother. "I hope it's not too much." "It's perfect," Eleanor assured her, genuinely touched by the gesture. The next hour passed in a blur of welcomes and orientations, neighbors dropping off meals, the home health nurse explaining equipment and schedules, Lily proudly showing off the reorganized first floor where Eleanor's study had been transformed into a temporary bedroom to minimize stair climbing during her initial recovery. "We've moved your favorite books down," Lily explained, indicating the carefully arranged shelves beside the new bed setup. "And your desk is positioned so you can see the garden while you're working." The thoughtfulness of this arrangement, preserving her scholarly environment while accommodating her physical limitations, moved Eleanor deeply. They had understood that recovery meant not just regaining physical strength but reclaiming the activities and spaces that defined her. By early afternoon, the visitors had departed, leaving Eleanor alone with her family in the quieter atmosphere of her modified home. They settled in the sunroom at the back of the house, always Eleanor's favorite space with its wall of windows overlooking the garden and comfortable reading chairs arranged to catch the natural light. "So," Rebecca said, setting cups of tea before each of them, "how does it feel to be home?" Eleanor considered the question carefully. "Surreal," she admitted. "For months, I imagined leaving this house for the last time, not returning to it with a revised prognosis. I had mentally prepared to let it go, along with everything else." "And now?" Michael asked. "Now I need to mentally prepare to reclaim it," Eleanor replied. "To inhabit not just the space but the life it represents. That's a different kind of adjustment." Lily, who had been relatively quiet since their arrival, spoke up from her position by the window. "Grandma, can I ask you something that might sound weird?" "The best questions often do," Eleanor encouraged. "Are you ever scared that the treatments might stop working? That after all this, the Renaissance planning, coming home, everything, things could go back to how they were before?" The directness of the question created a moment of silence. Michael and Rebecca exchanged concerned glances, clearly worried that such a question might be too difficult or depressing on what should be a celebratory day. But Eleanor appreciated her granddaughter's willingness to address the uncertainty that underlay all their planning and adjustments. Yes, she answered honestly. That possibility exists. Dr. Sharma has been very clear that while my response to the immunotherapy has been remarkable, it's not a guaranteed permanent reversal. She set her teacup down carefully before continuing. But I've decided that uncertainty isn't a reason to hold back from fully engaging with whatever time I have, whether that's months, years, or decades. If anything, it's a reason to engage more deeply. Like carpe diem? Lily asked. Seize the day because tomorrow is uncertain? Similar, Eleanor nodded, but perhaps with less desperation and more intention. Not just seizing moments because they might be limited, but shaping them because they matter, limited or not. This perspective, neither blind optimism nor fatalistic acceptance, but something more nuanced and purposeful, seemed to resonate with all of them, creating a moment of shared understanding across 3 generations. Speaking of shaping moments, Michael said, changing the subject with gentle deliberateness, the Riverside Cultural Center is officially confirmed for the Renaissance celebration. They had a cancellation for the spring equinox date, exactly as we hoped. The conversation shifted to practical matters, venue details, invitation designs, catering confirmations, but the earlier exchange had established an important precedent. They could acknowledge the uncertainty of Eleanor's medical future without diminishing their commitment to planning and living within that uncertainty. As afternoon faded toward evening, Eleanor found herself growing tired. The emotional and physical demands of the day taking their toll on her still recovering strength. Recognizing the signs, Rebecca suggested they continue discussions tomorrow after Eleanor had rested. The home health nurse will return at 7. For your evening assessment, she reminded Eleanor as they helped her settle into the newly arranged bedroom. Michael and I can stay if you'd like, or we can come back in the morning. Morning is fine, Eleanor assured them. I think I'd like some quiet time to reacquaint myself with being home. After they departed with promises to return for breakfast, Eleanor found herself alone in her house for the first time in months. The silence held a different quality than hospital quiet, richer, more layered with memory and meaning. This was the silence of her own space, filled with the subtle creaks and settling sounds of a Victorian home she knew intimately. She moved slowly through the first-floor rooms, reacquainting herself with the material elements of her life before hospitalization. The grandfather clock in the hallway that had belonged to her parents. The wall of family photographs chronicling decades of milestones and ordinary moments. The overflowing bookshelves that mapped her intellectual journey through literature, philosophy, and poetry. In her transformed study bedroom, Eleanor settled into the reading chair position near the window. From here, she could see the garden in the fading autumn light, the perennial beds now prepared for winter, the stone pathways she had walked thousands of times, the bird feeders still hanging from the branches of the old oak tree. Home. Not just as physical space but as the material expression of her continued existence. Every book, every photograph, every piece of furniture represented choices made, experiences lived, priorities established over decades. When the home health nurse arrived at 7, she found Eleanor sitting with her journal open, writing not medical observations but reflections on this return, on the strangeness and wonder of reclaiming a life she had prepared to relinquish. The next 2 weeks established new rhythms and routines as Eleanor adjusted to being an outpatient rather than a hospital resident. The home health team visited according to their schedule, checking vital signs, assisting with medications, providing physical therapy exercises designed to rebuild strength gradually. Dr. Sharma's immunotherapy treatments continued at Rochester Medical Institute, with Mrs. Peterson still serving as driver and companion for these bi-monthly journeys. The difference now was that Eleanor's family knew about these trips and often accompanied her, learning about the treatment protocol and asking the kinds of detailed questions that reflected their commitment to understanding her medical reality. Eleanor found herself navigating a curious middle ground, no longer defined primarily as a dying patient, not yet fully reintegrated into her pre-diagnosis identity. She was neither entirely sick nor completely well, neither actively dying, nor definitively cured. This liminal state required its own kind of adaptation, its own balance of limitation and possibility. The Renaissance celebration planning provided a focus for her energy during this adjustment period. What had begun as a simple party concept had evolved into something more meaningful, a genuine marking of transition, not just for Eleanor but for everyone connected to her. 3 weeks after her homecoming, Eleanor received an unexpected visitor. Dr. Mendelsohn arrived on a Saturday morning, not for a medical checkup but carrying what appeared to be a personal gift, a potted orchid and a book. "I hope I'm not intruding," he said as Rebecca showed him into the sunroom where Eleanor was reading. "I wanted to bring these by and see how you're settling in at home." "Not intruding at all," Eleanor assured him, genuinely surprised and touched by the gesture. Her relationship with Dr. Mendelsohn had been strictly professional during her hospitalization, cordial but never warm. This personal visit represented yet another boundary crossing in her revised narrative. "The orchid is from the hospital staff," he explained, setting the elegant white plant on the side table. "The book is from me." Eleanor examined the volume, a first edition of Virginia Woolf's Mrs. Dalloway, in remarkably good condition. The gift showed thoughtfulness and unexpected knowledge of her literary interests. "This is extraordinarily kind," she said, running her fingers over the book's spine with the appreciation of someone who understood its value. "How did you know Woolf is among my favorites?" Dr. Mendelsohn smiled slightly. "I may have consulted with Professor Garcia from your department. But I chose this particular title myself. Something about planning a party and confronting mortality seemed appropriate." The reference to Woolf's novel, centered around a day in which a woman plans a party while reflecting on life, death, and the passages between, revealed a literary awareness Eleanor hadn't expected from her physician. "It's perfect," she said simply. As they talked, Eleanor realized this visit served purposes beyond social courtesy. Dr. Mendelsohn was observing her in her home environment, assessing her adjustment and recovery outside the clinical setting. But he was also, she suspected, processing his own adjustment to her unexpected improvement, integrating this outcome into his understanding of medical possibilities and limitations. "Your case has generated significant interest in medical circles," he acknowledged when Eleanor gently pressed him on this point. "Not just the physiological response to the immunotherapy, which is remarkable in itself, but the psychological and social dimensions of transitioning from terminal prognosis to extended timeline." "Am I a case study in the making?" Eleanor asked, more curious than offended. "Several, potentially," Dr. Mendelsohn admitted. "Dr. Sharma is preparing a paper on the immunological markers that might have predicted your positive response. I'm more interested in how we communicate prognosis uncertainty and support patients through narrative revisions." The phrase caught Eleanor's attention. Narrative revisions? How we help patients integrate significant changes in their medical story, particularly when those changes disrupt expected trajectories, whether negatively or positively. Dr. Mendelsohn gestured to the home around them, the Renaissance celebration plans visible on the nearby table. "You've managed this narrative shift with remarkable adaptability. Not all patients do." This perspective, seeing her experience as valuable not just personally but potentially instructive for medical practice, added another dimension to Eleanor's understanding of her situation. Her story had implications beyond her individual journey. "I'd be willing to contribute to your research," she offered. "Though I suspect my background in narrative theory makes me an atypical case." "On the contrary," Dr. Mendelsohn replied. "Your ability to articulate the experience makes you an ideal subject. Your analytical framework provides insights that other patients might feel but cannot express." After he departed, Eleanor sat with this new awareness, that her experience might serve purposes beyond her personal recovery, that her professor's instinct to analyze and articulate might contribute to how medical professionals understand and support patients facing similar transitions. The idea added yet another layer to her renaissance, not just personal continuation but potential contribution to broader understanding. It was, she realized, another form of the teaching work that had defined her professional identity for decades. The following week brought Eleanor's 70th birthday, marked by a small family gathering at home rather than the elaborate celebration that would come with the Renaissance event in spring. Michael, Rebecca, and Lily arrived bearing gifts that reflected their deepening understanding of what mattered to her now. Rebecca presented a leather-bound journal with Eleanor's initials embossed on the cover. "For the next chapter," she explained. "Whether that's medical observations, personal reflections, or the beginnings of that book on narrative theory you've been talking about writing for years." Michael's gift was a state-of-the-art tablet loaded with digital versions of literary classics and academic journals. "The university library granted you special extended digital access," he explained. "You can access their entire collection remotely while you're rebuilding strength for campus visits." Lily's present was perhaps the most unexpected, a small digital recorder with simple operating instructions. "For oral history," she explained. "I thought maybe you could start recording some of your stories and thoughts. Not just about the medical stuff, but everything, your childhood, your teaching career, meeting Grandpa, raising Dad and Aunt Rebecca. Things we should know." The suggestion, that Eleanor should actively preserve her perspectives and memories, represented a significant shift from the urgent goodbye-oriented conversations of months past. This wasn't about documenting final thoughts but about creating a lasting record of a continuing life. That's remarkably thoughtful, Lily, Eleanor said, genuinely moved by the gift's implications. Well, Lily replied with characteristic directness. I figured out during all this that there's a lot I don't know about you, not because you're dying, but because I never really asked. So this is me asking. Not because time is running out, but because your stories matter. The distinction was profound, shifting from documentation as farewell to documentation as legacy and connection. From closing accounts to continuing contribution. As they shared birthday cake in the sunroom, Eleanor reflected on how different this gathering felt from the somber family visits of months past. There was still awareness of medical uncertainty, still acknowledgement of physical limitations. But these elements no longer defined their interactions. They had moved from a narrative of ending to one of continuation, with all the complex possibilities that entailed. Later that evening, after her family had departed and the home health nurse had completed her evening check, Eleanor sat alone with the gifts they had given her. The journal representing reflection and future writing. The tablet offering continued. Intellectual engagement. The recorder inviting her to preserve her voice and perspective. On impulse, she picked up the recorder, figuring out its simple controls with the methodical attention she brought to new technologies. Pressing the record button, she began to speak, reflections on turning 70 while neither dying on schedule, nor entirely well. A literature professor's notes on narrative disruption and the curious state of continuing when continuation was not expected. Her voice, stronger now than it had been in months, filled the quiet room, not with final thoughts or urgent goodbyes, but with the measured considerations of someone engaging with an ongoing story. She spoke about the disorientation of reclaiming a relinquished future. About the strange grief that accompanied leaving the clarity of terminal diagnosis for the uncertainty of extended prognosis. About the complex gratitude that colored her days now, appreciation not just for more time, but for the perspective that confronting mortality had brought to how she used that time. As she spoke, Eleanor felt herself doing what she had done throughout her academic career, making meaning through articulation, finding patterns in experience, connecting personal narrative to universal themes. This was not so different from analyzing literature, after all. The text was her own life, but the interpretive skills remained the same. When she finally set the recorder aside, Eleanor felt a sense of satisfaction that transcended the day's celebration. She had begun the work of integrating her medical journey into her larger identity, not allowing it to define her, but not denying its transformative impact either. Outside her window, the autumn night was clear and star-filled. Eleanor thought about astronomical distances, about light traveling from stars that might have died while their illumination was still journeying toward Earth. Another form of continuation after ending, influence extending beyond physical presence. Whether her remission lasted months or years or decades, she had already experienced this truth, that endings and continuations were rarely as absolute as they appeared, that influence continued in unexpected ways, that narrative revisions were part of both literature and life. As she prepared for sleep in her transformed study bedroom, Eleanor Sullivan, professor, patient, protagonist in a story still unfolding, felt a deepening commitment to the renaissance she was planning. It would celebrate not just survival, but intentional continuation, a declaration that whatever time remained would be approached with full awareness of its preciousness and potential. They had planned her funeral. She had planned a renaissance. And in the space between those intentions lay all the difference in how a story might progress from its unexpected middle toward whatever ending eventually came. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell, so you don't miss any upload from us.